opportunity. Sorry, thank you. Erin Alamon, Executive Director. I'm just providing some brief announcements before the meeting gets officially started here. At the end of last year, I was invited to go to Munich and Berlin in Germany with a delegation of legislators and civic leaders and others to understand how their transit system works. Germany is a really good case study for transit in comparison to the Chicago region, because they love their cars. They build, VW and BMWs there, but they also have a really strong transit system. And so we spent a lot of time with elected officials, with their chamber, with their union folks to understand how it works, how they've invested in it, and how they've continued to make it successful here. I think a couple things that I took away, and I hope that our legislative delegation took away, was that the investment in transit doesn't happen. The financial investment's important, but the success that they've had doesn't happen overnight. It's taken decades for them to get to the point where they have trains arriving every few minutes in these giant stations. We got to ride the high-speed rail between Munich and Berlin that went 187 miles per hour. But they have a national fare card, so you can use your fare card to get on everything except for the high-speed rail for one monthly rate. That they have one timetable for the entire country that gets updated every year. So all of the trains are coordinated in terms of when they're coming in and coming out. It doesn't mean they're always like at 100% on time, but I can tell you that every train we took was certainly on time. And so I'm hopeful that our legislators took away from that experience that, from the front-facing public perspective, that you can have this coordination in a really meaningful way. And it's something that we could be doing here in the Chicagoland region. As we think about funding for transit, two other things that we've been paying attention to is New York's congestion pricing program that went into effect at the beginning of the year. Thinking about how we fund transit, that program was stood up with the intent that those funds would go directly to transit. In Chicago to help them avert and in New York to help them avert their fiscal cliff and also help reduce congestion, clean the air. And so again, maybe we're not ready for that here in the Chicago region just yet, but again, we're thinking about how we deliver that funding to transit. And looking at things like sales tax modernization is another thing that we had put in the part report, that we continue to talk with tax policy experts, with IML, with the State Counties Association, to understand how we might look at some of these funding tools and mechanisms that we have in place right now and bring them to this complex fiscal cliff to help solve that problem that we have on the horizon here. I also wanted to mention that our Safe Travel for All Regions Safety-Wide Initiative continues. And I think an important role for you all as you go back to your home communities is that we are looking for public input. Over the past few months, we have had about 1,100 people share areas of safety concern in their communities. To help increase participation, we are offering raffles for $100 Visa gift cards with the hope that that incents more people to share where there are safety hotspots. So if you have newsletters that you could be sharing the links, we are doing this comprehensively with every county. And so feedback from your communities would be really important as well. You'll hear about the risk-based vulnerability assessment, so I won't get into that. And I know our legislative affairs team is here as well. Mayor Schilke and I, just two more quick things that I wanted to share with you. We were talking a little bit about the federal transportation dollars and, what might happen with the transition in Washington. And one of the positive things about the way that we fund transportation at the federal level is that we typically have a 5-year transportation bill. This bill is up for renewal in 2026. My peers, I know that the counties, the states, the State Department of Highways Association are all starting to talk about federal transportation reauthorization and what policies might go into the next bill. My guess would be, if I was a betting person, is that the October 2026 expiration is right around the same time as we'll see midterm elections, and so I would anticipate that we'll have a continuing resolution. I think things that might go by the wayside are all the competitive grant programs that are funded through general funds and not the transportation funding sources themselves. But in terms of the core formula funding, I think we should continue to anticipate that those will still come to the region. And so I have no expectation that anything is going to change with those funds in the near term. And I think it's incumbent upon us to think about different ways for us to make sure that we are continue to be competitive. Think about our location as an important hub for goods and freight movement across the country. And so some of those areas I think will be really important for us to coalesce around as we get into transportation bill reauthorization. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that our local dues, our letters have gone out to municipalities, to counties, to our transportation partners, transit agencies, and others. Our funds need to be matched with 20% local funds, and so we get that from you all. So I want to A, thank you, and B, just let you know if you have any questions or if you hear from your councils, from other members, we're happy to reach out, talk to folks to make sure that they understand the value that we provide to them locally. So it looks like, are we close to quorum? No, we're not there yet. Okay. Well, with that, let me turn it over to Mayor Schilke in case you wanted to, or happy to answer any questions that many of you will have. Those were my announcements for this morning.
Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome Mayor Brady and Mayor Werner who have shown up. Appreciate that very much. We are waiting for a quorum situation here. It's
Mayor Nelson.
there's Mayor
Mayor Nelson.
Nelson, you want to come up and sit
Yeah, we'll grab your
up there in the
nameplate.
front so everybody can get to know you better?
Welcome. Oh, I was just saying, I wish it's like it never snowed, but really, if it could have saved the snow for the middle of the day after we were all done traveling, that would have been better. Yeah. We're glad you're here.
So now we're down to, are we just still needing one
One more. Okay.
more?
Mayor, you could do your announcements. Page 3, at the bottom of page 3, couple things.
All right, we're trying to do the stuff that we can get by with and not have a vote and cause a problem. So I'm going to jump to our agenda, which is item 3A, CMAP announcements. And we have some. After 35 years of dedicated service, including leading the Illinois Department of Transportation since 2019, IDOT Secretary Omar Osman retired at the end of last year. We extend our gratitude to Secretary Osman's leadership and contributions to our state and this agency, and we wish him the best in his future endeavors. Governor Pritzker has named Gia Biaggi as the new IDOT Secretary. Her experience will continue to advance the state's transportation initiatives, and we look forward to continuing a strong partnership between IDOT and CMAP. I attended the CMAP Policy Committee meeting last week as representative of this group. The MPO Policy Committee is the federally designated body of Northeastern Illinois to fulfill the committee acted to approve the Unified Work Program for fiscal year 2026 and the 2025 roadway safety targets. We'll hear more about the MPO Policy Committee and CMAP's role as a metropolitan planning organization later in this meeting.
I think we can, Mayor, I think we can skip right to the IDOT local roads report. We can do reports in the presentations.
Right.
And save for when we have a quorum, if we have a quorum, all the business items that require votes.
Right. Do we have somebody from IDOT here to?
We do.
I think Chad's here.
Chad,
I saw Chad
are you here to give us
in person.
a report?
I'm not important enough to be official, so that's okay. You can do it.
Well, we'll make you official.
He's official.
I know you are.
I will say my first day at IDOT was May of 1981, so, but then I took a break and did.
You and I started about the same day.
Yeah, but I took a 20-year break and then came back in 99, so, this is all different up here. Yeah, nothing, I know last meeting I gave, she wanted me to talk for 10 minutes, I talked for a half hour, so she shared all the information about us, so I'll take any questions you have, but basically, it's, again, Happy New Year. I want to thank all the councils, all the PLs, we had a great 24. District 1 as a whole, state and local did like $2.2 billion worth of work. And District 1 local roads ourselves with our measly little 20 people staff and all of your help did $1.05 billion worth of work. That's MFT, bond funds, federal, all that kind of stuff. So again, appreciate the effort. There's a lot of work out there. Contractors are still knocking on our door wanting more, but we're doing the best we can. So again, and like I say, just for state lettings, we did about $460 million just on the regular state letting. So again, appreciate your effort there. And like I say, just moving ahead, we are very active. We got 23 projects, which is probably one of our biggest lettings on January, which will be opened up on Friday. And the next three combined, we're looking around 90 projects. But again, you know, half of those aren't going to make it because of right of way. So again, want to emphasize, if you have a project with right of way, come up with a realistic schedule to make sure that, you know, we don't waste time reviewing plans and get that done. Other than that, I want to also mention ITEP. We had 105 ITEP applications for the district. So those have been reviewed. They're in central office, and hopefully usually around April to make the announcement. So hopefully we'll move ahead with that, and that program should remain active. And just a note to prep, Safe Routes to School will be out there this fall. Other than that, really nothing new to report. It's business as usual, which is great. But any questions or comments or complaints, I will gladly try to address.
Anybody got any comments or complaints for IDOT?
Your
Mayor-
microphone, Mayor?
Mayor, would you use the mic?
Chairman Osmond a couple weeks ago, but we just requested through our COG that a little more presence if possible, and I know what you guys have to do and so on, but a little more presence at the individual COG meetings, just to communicate more on what's going on.
Yeah, I'm trying to emphasize that, you know, back, you know, pre-COVID, I mean, I think most of you know when I started in local roads in 2000, I basically was at all the transportation committee meetings, and, you know, I enjoyed that interaction, and I do try to emphasize, but, you know, I'll work on it. I'll mention it. Again, some of them are virtual, so they are actually present for questions and answers, but, we'll try to make it more, reasonable. Cause I know your actual transportation one, Kevin's available. As far as your night meeting, I apologize. I used to be able to attend those, and it's just a lot going on, and maybe I'll try to make that a little more availability. So, yeah.
Mayor Durkee?
I just want to say again, many thanks to IDOT and to CMAP Shared Fund for our Route 14 underpass under the CN Railroad project. Went to letting in November, and we have a contract now, and work will start. So a long time, but a lot of good work by a lot of people. Thank you. Thank you so much.
One of those, like I said, I have a checklist that, you know, before I'm not going to run for reelection, that I want to have done. So see how that plays out. So with that, we're good.
Yep, you're the man to know. Thank you for
Thank you.
coming. One of the things is just, Jane has just pointed out to me, is we've got two guests in the audience, from the National Weather Bureau. And I think it would probably be a good idea if we could ask them to come forward. We're welcoming today Eric Lennon and Mike Pardo, meteorologists from the National Weather Service Weather Forecasting Office in Romeoville. Their office provides weather, hydraulic, and climate forecasting coverage for 23 counties in northwestern Illinois and northeastern Illinois and northwest Indiana. Eric and Mike will share with us weather trends in the region and opportunities to coordinate with their office to prepare for hazardous weather conditions. So gentlemen, thank you for coming.
We greatly appreciate the invitation, so thank you for that. So we have some slides prepared for you, but we certainly hope to have a little bit of time for discussion afterward to ask questions. We always want to start with reminding people that we are the National Weather Service, and we are part of the U.S. federal government. So under the Department of Commerce, there is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and then underneath NOAA is the National Weather Service. And the mission statement pretty much sums it up. And the key part of this mission statement is the part in the red: protection of life and property and enhancement of the national economy. And both of those are equally important. And you know, some of the examples we like to give, you know, for transportation, for airlines or for shipping industry on the water, You know, it's obviously you want to protect the people that are traveling. You want to protect the ships. You don't want shipwrecks, but again, you know, airplanes are meant to fly and ships are meant to sail. And so you know, it's a balance. You can't stay in port or you can't stay on the ground. But, you know, so we want to make decisions and help people who are the decision makers balance those two sometimes competing interests. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just give a brief overview of what we plan to talk about. First of all, my name is Eric Lenning. I'm the meteorologist in charge for the National Weather Service here in Chicago. We're located out in Romeoville. And Mike Bardew is our warning coordination meteorologist, WCM. He is our outreach coordinator. So he works very closely with the people in your communities to make sure that they are getting the information they need from us. The two parts to our talk. First of all, we're going to introduce our office, talk about who we are, what we do, how we serve your local communities and support public safety. And then the second part is talking about some of the evolving climate trends that we've been seeing, the basis for why it's evolving, some of the observations that we've already seen, as well as some of the local impacts that we have already been observing. But I'm going to turn it over to Mike to handle the first part, and then I'll pick back up with the second half.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. My name is Mike. As Eric said, our office is down in Romeoville. And this map here, I know it's hard to see all the details, but we're a federal agency, as Eric mentioned, so we have a national presence everywhere. But we're fortunate that we have a local footprint, and that's something that we really pride ourselves on as an agency, is we have local offices all over the country. All those red dots there are the 122 different local forecast offices, just like ours in Romeoville. They're all pretty similar. And they cover multiple counties in most cases, several dozen counties. Maybe they have footprints in several states. We have footprints in Indiana and Illinois, of course. The shaded regions are administrative regions that we work through as part of the Weather Service. The big yellow area is the central region. So our regional headquarters is in Kansas City. There's other centers as well. Who's heard of the Hurricane Center probably? The Storm Prediction Center. They issue tornado watches, severe thunderstorm watches. There's the Tsunami Warning Center. There's several other national centers that kind of provide a higher level of guidance that we work with. We coordinate with them as we work weather systems or weather situations, and we drill down to the details locally. We have river forecast centers. We're going to talk about hydrology and rainfall coming up here. Our river forecast center, it's a regional facility, more so than we are. They're located in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, and they cover the watershed that we're responsible for. And we work very closely with them when it comes to river levels, river forecasts. They're a combination of hydrologists, meteorologists, and engineers. And they run models specific to the local river basins to tell us, all right, what are the flows going to be? How high is the river going to get? And really help determine what's going to be flooded and maybe what isn't. Also locally, we have another weather service facility that you're probably not familiar with, as I'm guessing. It's called the Center Weather Service Unit. And there's 21 of those across the country, and they're embedded with FAA facilities. So the FAA has an Air Route Traffic Control Center in Aurora. So we have 4 meteorologists that are contracted to the FAA that work at that facility that provide about 16-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week coverage to the traffic managers who are determining the airflow or the flow of aircraft in and out of Chicago, one of the busiest airspaces in the world. We provide airport forecasts from our local office, and we coordinate with those forecasters at what we call the center on a regular basis to make sure that the weather information is the latest and greatest, and that you know, we're trying to avoid as many delays as possible. But you've all flown out of Chicago, I assume, and know how that goes sometimes. Usually it's because of the weather. So we have a very local footprint. If you go to the next slide, please. Our county warning area, as we call it, our area of responsibility, is outlined in the yellow. We have 18 counties in northern Illinois, and we have 5 over in northwest Indiana. We cover portions of Lake Michigan as well, things like special marine warnings, small craft advisories, gale warnings. Our population, we're actually the 5th most populated forecast area in the Weather Service with about 10.5 million people. People equals opportunity for us. I'll talk more about our services in just a second, but you think about it, even Cook County alone, 134 municipalities, plus the city of Chicago, plus the greater metro area, plus we have some areas that are a little bit more rural. So we kind of run the full gamut of you know, type of land use, population size, diversity, economic, socioeconomic ranges, and all that type of, you know, elements. So we have a lot of partners we work with. I'll go into that in just a second. So we're very busy. The weather alone keeps us busy, but the opportunities to partner with groups like this, your communities, specifically the counties and so forth, it's a very high demand for us. So we have about 2 to 3 people per shift, and we have about 24 people in our office, the other 4 at the CWSU, and most offices in the Weather Service like ours are staffed pretty much the same. So 2 to 3 people on a forecast shift watching the weather 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also try to do outreach to the public, certainly outreach with our partners that I'll go into in just a minute. But with a large population, that's one of our challenges. The budget numbers are there. This is from a couple years ago, FY23, about $1.3 billion is the entire Weather Service budget. So if you divide that out by the number of Americans, you get about $4 per year per American is what it costs to operate the Weather Service. So I'll let you gauge the value of that for yourself. Next slide, please. So what we do is we call them products and services. And one of our products is the forecast. You go to weather.gov, you put in your zip code, you put in your city, and you get a forecast that goes out to 7 days. You can actually find information on an hourly frequency out to 7 days if you look for it a little bit. That green box on the map there, that's what we call a forecast point. So our forecasters are working 24/7. We're assessing what the atmosphere has been doing, what it's doing now, and then we combine that with our expertise, what we've seen over the years, our training, conceptual models of how we know the atmosphere operates, along with high resolution model information, which is ever evolving, to try to determine what's going to happen next. Now we take that information, we populate a database. So when you go and click a forecast point on the map, you come up with that green box. It's about 1.5 miles by 1.5 miles square. I think we have somewhere around like 6,000 little squares in our 23 county area. We're populating that all the time. So that's going to be, what's the temperature going to be? The high temperature, what's the dew point, heat index, amount of precipitation, type of precipitation, cloud cover, wind speed, wind direction, all these different elements that you go outside and you ultimately feel when you walk out the door. We're putting that into a database. Now that information is available for everybody. So it's up to the public, partners use it, the data can be manipulated in various ways. The commercial part of the weather enterprise, like a Weather Channel, AccuWeather, other private vendors, some of which are even local to the area, they can use that data for whatever they want to use it for and tailor it to someone's specific need. The data is there for everybody. So that's one part of what we do. We put out our own products, the website, social media. If you go to the next slide, please, I'll show you a few examples there. Actually, we'll come back to what I was just talking about in a second. We're always dealing with weather hazards, right? We live in Chicago, 4 seasons in the same day. All the jokes and comments you might hear about that, wait 20 seconds and give it 20 minutes and the weather's doing something different. We live it all the time, right? The lake creates challenges for us as forecasters, but we have a lot of weather that we need to worry about, whether it's summer weather, extreme heat, high rainfall amounts, tornadoes. We had 58 tornadoes last year, or excuse me, in 23. This is 24. We just finished up. We had another record number of tornadoes in our area this past year, a record number of tornadoes for the state of Illinois in 2024, swaths of damaging wind, all kinds of different summer hazards that we're dealing with. We're going to talk about rainfall in just a little bit when I turn it back over to Eric. Winter. So a tough forecast for this morning, honestly. Yesterday morning, I wasn't expecting to be coming down in the train in the snow. By last night, I looked, I'm like, all right, I better wear my big coat and make sure I'm ready for some snow on the drive to the train station, right? Things change. Marine forecasts. The beaches, actually, we do beach forecasts. Lake Michigan is probably one of our most consistent weather-related killers, honestly. More people drown in the lake in our area than most other weather hazards cause in terms of fatalities. High surf, rip currents. We provide information that alert people to those things and work very closely with the media to get that information out. So hopefully people don't have issues when they get into the lake. We talked about hydrology, flash flooding, other hazards, fire weather. Certainly a little bit different fire weather environment that we have than they have in California, but we do get wildfires. We have prescribed burns with land management agencies. We've had dust storm warnings we've had to issue in the past few years because of blowing dusts in more rural areas. We run the full gamut is kind of the bottom line. Our role is to provide information to help people protect themselves and their things and enhance the economy, as Eric mentioned, right? So anything weather related, we're basically trying to be a local expert in it to provide support to the general public and more specifically support to our government partners. That's really who we're mandated to serve in addition to the public is government partners at any level. So we call that decision support, and I'll come back to that in just a second. If we go to the next slide, please. Some of the samples of the things that go out the door, so to speak, in terms of information that's publicly visible, publicly available. Social media has obviously become huge. So we're on Facebook, we're on X. We have YouTube videos that we post periodically, that type of thing. We don't have an app, actually. There's no weather service app, but our data probably feeds one of the thousands of or more different apps that are out there that are related to weather. It just kind of depends. The key thing about an app is know what the source of information is. So is it credible? Is it reliable? But we don't have an app for ourselves. We have the website, of course. Wireless emergency alerts. Has anyone had their phone go off with a little tornado siren sound when you've been in a tornado warning? Right, a lot of folks in the room. We don't control the function of that necessarily, but it's a partnership with the FCC and some other agencies. But when we put a tornado warning out, which we do from our local office, that's going to set things in motion for various warning systems. No weather radio, which we operate directly, the wireless emergency alerts, any other alerting service that someone might subscribe to. That information really starts with us as we make a decision about whether we need severe weather warnings or flash flood warnings and the like, which we do locally as well. Talked about weather radio, the bat phone. We joke about that a little bit, but with the city of Chicago OEMC, for several decades, we've had a direct hotline to their operations center where we pick up a phone. We do have a little bat symbol on it. You pick it up, you don't have to dial anything. Someone else on the other end picks up and we're talking to each other. A little bit old school, but it really works. So we have different ways that we try to provide support. NWS chat, I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. Communication with our partners is huge. The past 15 or 20 years since I've been in the Weather Service, there's been a major evolution from just being sort of the science and weather forecasting nerds to actually having to make sure we can communicate that forecast and interpret it for folks so that they can actually understand it and be able to do something actionable with it. So our role has really evolved. We still provide the scientific basis for the forecast and make those decisions, but now we're getting more and more into communicating those things, making sure people understand, working with partners if they're exercising or training or developing plans for hazardous weather. That's more and more of our role, and the Weather Service is evolving more and more towards that as we look towards another modernization in the next 5 to 10 years or so. Next slide, please. As we drill down more specifically, I mentioned government support. Again, we can support pretty much any government agency. I mentioned all the municipalities in Cook County alone, let alone those in Will and Kane, Kendall, and beyond. Literally hundreds and hundreds of agencies that we could partner with, and we do partner with. I mentioned that local presence is a point of pride for us. You know, we have direct connections with probably most communities in this room. So they have direct access to subject matter expertise when it comes to weather. So we work with emergency management agencies, police, fire. A lot of times they serve that role as well as emergency manager, public works, DOT. Basically, we have a growing list of local partnerships to support your communities. So when folks that you rely on to make decisions to help protect your citizens, we're providing what we call decision support service, or DSS, to them, interpreting the weather information, making sure the message is relevant to what their thresholds are. Maybe we're even before that working with them on training and exercising or plan development. A big thing that's become, or a thing that's become big for us is support for special events. Who has a community festival? Fireworks, everyone in the room probably, right? So a lot of effort goes into planning that. So we now conduct seminars with local officials on how to plan and prepare for the weather aspect, because that's probably the most frequent higher profile situation or threat that you're probably going to deal with is the weather as you try to plan these things. So we do seminars all across the area, and each year we have 200 or 300 folks that attend these seminars. We work with them. What do you need to plan for weather-wise? What tools are available to you to monitor the weather as you create your plans? And then what other services, what kind of coordination, what kind of consultation can we provide as weather is actually happening? The volume is a challenge for us. We do a lot of things remotely. The number up there, 5,600 briefings. One thing that we do for our local partners is from Labor Day weekend through Memorial Day weekend through Labor Day weekend is any day there's an expectation of thunderstorms, we have a series of briefings that we invite them to. A few hours before storms develop, so if they have events, they can maybe modify the schedule or think about if they need to adjust resources, make public notifications about the potential for an evacuation or a sheltering operation, that type of thing. As weather evolves, we're on there every 30 or 60 minutes. They tune in. We talk about where things are going, what events might be affected. They can ask questions. 167 briefing sessions on 31 days this past summer. Is very busy thunderstorm wise, provided 5,600 briefings that way. So we stay very active with our local partners, and that's one of our big ongoing efforts and goals that we have. So we're local to you folks and your folks that you rely on for protecting the public from hazards when it comes to weather. We can provide a support function to them. Next slide, please. I'll turn it back over to Eric, and he'll talk about some of the other elements that we operate under and more into the climate part of it. Thank you.
So this diagram is just kind of a quick summary of what Mike presented. The forecast is really only part of what we do. It's like the first step. But once we come up with forecasts, we have to figure out how to communicate it in a way that people will understand and be able to make decisions. And so, we work very hard on that. Sometimes it's more difficult to communicate the forecast than to actually come up with it. And then partners make decisions based on that information. But then the next phase of it, the forecasting communication, I call that the operational forecasting part of it. After that, we're always evaluating how well did we communicate, how well did partners respond, did they get the information they needed, how was the science, did we interpret it correctly, did the forecast come together correctly? Then we refine. We're always training on new scientific techniques, new radar interrogation skills. There's new satellite data coming all the time. The science of meteorology is still relatively young and evolving. But we also come up with new ways of communicating, new ways of sharing the information with our partners. And so once that information is available and the new tools are in place, then we can train. The forecasts they're always training. Our training plan is just kind of infinite. But Mike talked about some of the efforts we do with local public safety officials, the training that we provide, we call event ready support, that they would be better prepared to monitor our information and use that information to make decisions and keep their event goers safe. So it's just a continuous cycle. And again, the forecasting is only just a tiny little part of it. But all of that is in support of Weather Ready Nation. That's the National Weather Service way of trying to promote the idea that people need to tune into the weather information and be prepared to respond. And your local community, some of you may have a Storm Ready designation. That is a formal certification process that works through our office to make sure that all the mechanisms are in place within your community to receive our information and disseminate it, and to help your local officials as well as your public to be prepared. So if you're interested in more information about Storm Ready, Mike is available to talk about that when we're done. We'll go to the next slide and transition here. This is the science part of the talk. Before I was the meteorologist in charge, I was the science and operations officer for the office. So we want to talk about the water cycle. This is, dust off your 8th grade memory. I think a lot of us had earth science back then, promptly forgot much of it. But the water cycle is why Mike and I have jobs. It's just, the entire process of weather is all driven by the evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and it's, the ongoing process. The rivers and lakes obviously collect the runoff and send it back into the oceans, and we start all over again. So we'll go to the next slide. I want to talk about just to offer a little perspective. The Earth, the radius of the Earth is approximately 4,000 miles from the surface to the center, and the atmosphere is only about 60 miles thick. So, if you lay that down on the map, it doesn't even get us to Milwaukee in terms of the thickness. But if it's a little bit easier to understand, if you had a basketball and you had a ruler, the thickness of the atmosphere around the basketball, call it the basket sphere, is only 1/16 of an inch. So that's kind of just a way to help visualize how thin that little layer is around the Earth. And, humans can definitely influence the composition of that little tiny, tiny thin layer around the planet. Going on in the next slide. Gases in the dry atmosphere. This is a number that all of us should be walking around and knowing in our heads. 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. We definitely need that oxygen to exist. 99% of the gases in the atmosphere are nitrogen and oxygen. That's almost all of it right there, but there's some other important things. We'll look at the next slide here. Argon is actually 0.9. So if you have argon, oxygen, and nitrogen, you're up to 99.9, actually above 99.9% of the gases in the atmosphere. But there are some others. Carbon dioxide, we don't measure in percentages. We measure in parts per million when we get down to these trace level gases. I put a greater than sign. So carbon dioxide over greater than 400 parts per million. That number is actually going up. So neon, helium, and methane are some of the other main gases. The methane is actually just a trace of even the carbon dioxide, 1.8 parts per million. The greenhouse gases, the carbon dioxide and methane, we call those greenhouse gases. And the reason why is because they absorb energy from the Earth and then they dissipate it back out to the atmosphere. Without those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we would actually be about almost 60 degrees cooler. And a lot of things that happen on Earth would not happen, like, crops and vegetation, things like that. So we really need those greenhouse gases for our existence. But tiny, tiny, tiny amounts are able to actually keep our atmosphere at the level that it's at right now. So go at the next slide here. I mentioned that the CO2, the 400 parts per million is not steady. It's actually gone up quite a bit over time. This graph goes back to 1750. We are probably more at 420, 425 parts per million now. And it's going up pretty steeply, but 1750 is where this starts, and you can start to see gradual increase, and then more recently, a pretty sharp increase. I have a question up there. What was happening around 1750? Industrialization. We started to have factories. We started to dig up coal and pump oil and start to burn those things. And it's putting carbon that had been stored in the earth, it's putting it back in the atmosphere. It took millions of years for it to actually become stored, and then it's only a couple hundred now that it's being released back in. So that's kind of the trend that we're seeing. The atmospheric CO2 parts per million, 425. The gray line there is the annual emissions. So they're tracking very closely. The next slide. All right, this is actually science has been pretty well established for 40, 50 plus years. This is a study from the Exxon Corporation back in 1982, and it, really excellent science at that time to be able to model and anticipate the trends. The number one, the increasing levels of carbon dioxide, and then number two, how the atmosphere would respond with its temperature. The black lines are their projections there, and the right one is just kind of a blown up version of the one on the left. But the black lines were their projections for CO2 increases and temperature increases, and then the blue and the red are what actually occurred. So up to this point, or at least 2020, for 1980 had a little bit more primitive technology, but their studies, this is just one. This is a corporation, but obviously the government was studying, and there were also lots of academic research going on as well. So it's been pretty well understood for a while. Go to the next slide here. This is kind of the result that we're seeing. This is the global temperature change measured from 1850, and it's scaled on the period based on you see the bold line at the bottom from roughly 1960 through 2010. So it's just scaled based on that period. So right around that 1960 to 2010 is where you can see it. The global temperature change relative to that period being lower, and now it's being warmer. But the key thing you started to really see from 1940 through the last half of the 20th century, not quite as pronounced of a lower, and that's not to say it was cold back then. It's just relative to this current period that we're plotting it against. It makes 1910 look like some kind of ice age. No, it's not. That was like the normal at the time. But you can see really since probably 1990 into 2000 in the 20 teens up to the current. In fact, the last few years, it's really we've really started to notice a very significant increase in the trends, and it's been many years since we've seen a below average global temperature. So the next slide brings it into more of a local perspective. If we're looking at the warmest and coldest years on record for Chicago, the one on the left is the warmest, top 10 warmest, and 5 of those prior to 2024, 5 of those were since 2012. And now 2024 is now the new record holder. So 2017 will go off the list, but we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those in the top 10. And in fact, it's actually more like the top 8. So locally, we're seeing this as well, is the point of this. We don't see anything on the right-hand side. Those are the 10 coolest. The most recent top 10 coolest was from 1985 here in Chicago. And the next slide. So what are the effects that we've been seeing? Going back to the water cycle, we talk. I call it like the fire hose effect. Our hydrologist talks about loading the dice. It doesn't mean you're not going to see a cooler winter or, I mean, a cooler year. It just means that, you know, if you roll the dice, you're more likely to come up with a warmer. That's just where the atmosphere is at right now. The fire hose effect I talk about is like when we're looking at rainfall trends, it seems like we're kind of getting maybe not so much more rainfall, but maybe more concentrated rainfall. And when you receive it all at once, it's not going to absorb into the ground as well, and it's more of it's going to run off. And so ironically, when you have a warmer atmosphere, you get more water in the atmosphere, more frequent extreme heat, and increased evaporation rates out of the soil. So you can actually get like a flash drought. We've been seeing situations recently where it looks like we're getting normal rainfall, but the ground's really dry, and you know, you're not actually seeing beneficial use of that. So I call that the fire hose effect. You can't really drink very well from a fire hose. But then you also could get more intense rainfall, more runoff, less ground absorption. So also increased possibilities for flash flooding. And, you know, water vapor is the most important greenhouse gas. I didn't mention it before. Carbon dioxide and methane are driving the long-term temperature change, but water vapor is actually the most influential, but it's not driving the change. Does anyone have enough science on their brain on this cold morning to know why it's carbon dioxide and methane and not water vapor? No volunteers? It's because water vapor doesn't actually stay in the atmosphere very long. It's always going in and out. It's always cycling through. That water cycle I talked about, the carbon dioxide cycle is measured in centuries, not days. So that's the reason why those are increasing and driving it. Whereas carbon dioxide or water vapor, we know on a cloudy night, it can be warmer than like a clear, starry cold winter night. So that's the water vapor is a nice blanket for us, but it's not gradually accumulating. All right, next. So our hydrologist, Scott Lincoln, he has to sometimes get it simple for me. He says all at once is bad. When you get all the rainfall at one time, that's not as good as getting it spread out over periods of time. So more of it's going to run off, more of it's going into the creeks and the rivers, and more of that's going to cause flooding. Less of it's going to be absorbed into the soils. So next slide. When your infrastructure is designed for an atmosphere that existed 50 years ago, it's not going to be able to handle what we're seeing now. And so that's the concern that we're bringing today and that we're asked to talk about. And it dovetails nicely into the next talk, which we did not coordinate at all, as it turns out, but it's a really perfect segue to the concepts that we're introducing here. The question is, are extreme amounts becoming larger or more frequent? So an amount that you might be expected to receive once every 100 years, are we actually seeing that? So next slide here. In Chicago in 2023, you might remember NASCAR weekend. It was supposed to be a race. It turned into a regatta because of the flooding that occurred. That was an extreme rainfall event, and the city was asking us, how rare is this? How often is this going to occur? While we were researching it, another event occurred in South Cook County. And these were not really 100-year events. These were more like 500 or 1,000-year events in some locations in terms of what we would anticipate receiving. And we had 2 within a few months. So moving forward here, next slide. Looking just at Central Cook County, we're seeing this all over our area, but the study that was done locally in our office was focused on Central Cook County. We used to see maybe one a decade of threshold 7.5 inches. 7.5 is supposed to be what we see roughly every 100 years, but lately we've been seeing it already since 2020. We've had 3 such episodes in Central Cook County of that 7.5 inch threshold within 24 hours. So obviously 7.5 probably is not a 100-year type event anymore. It's I hope it's not a 3 times a decade event, but the point being, what used to be considered 100-year is either going to be more frequent or a higher threshold. And we'll go to the next slide. NOAA Atlas 15. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that, but certainly the engineers in your communities and the contractors that you hire should be familiar with NOAA Atlas 15 or the Illinois State Water Survey bulletins, because those are used for engineering, for infrastructure planning, for design standards, for drainage planning. And the current atlas from NOAA is from 2000, and it's in the process of being updated. It's going to be released next year. Now, if the atmosphere is not changing, you wouldn't have to update these atlases because what they account for is the past data, 30 years of observations or more. But the new ones are coming along and it's like, well, it doesn't really help you, the planners, if we give you what happened in the past. We also need to help you understand what may happen in the future. So these are going to go out through the year 2100 in terms of what we expect to be occurring. The Illinois State Water Survey is also in the process of updating a similar bulletin. The next slide. All right. So the point of this is just to let you know some new information is coming, some new guidance is coming. And we're trying to help you, NOAA, the agency, not only in your daily work in terms of protecting your public, but also in the next decades to come to plan your infrastructure in a way that would be resilient for the atmosphere, not as it is today, not as it was 40 years ago, but what it might be in 40 years from now. So it's a quick little summary of what we had to share with you today.
Thank you. Anybody have any particular questions you'd like to ask? I think, we originally discussed this at a previous meeting a little bit, and there was a lot of questions. Just you've touched on many of them here about how many, it seems like we were getting more and more heavy rain events and whatever have you, and it sounds like that's something that we're going to be faced with. So is there any other weather, I think one of the concerns was how many tornadoes we seem to be getting. Is that on the impact increase too?
I think there's less of a confidence regarding other aspects of severe weather. One of the things that we've been seeing with tornadoes is almost like the technology and ability to detect those tornadoes that we might have thought previously were windstorms. And so some of it could be driven both by the technology, the better radars, the higher resolution radar, the quicker scans, as well as the improved communication networks that we have, as well as satellite data that can actually do aerial surveys and track through cornfields that we might not have been able to get to before. So the idea is that maybe we're not going to be seeing necessarily an increase, but maybe the outbreaks that we have might be, they might have more tornadoes or they might be more intense. We might not necessarily see more such outbreaks. That's kind of what we're looking at right now, but yeah, there's less confidence in tying those kind of impacts.
Good to know that. Appreciate that very much. Anybody else got any observations or questions?
And Jeff, thank you. And thank you, Eric and Mike, for this very enlightening presentation. I learned a lot today. It's very important, the weather forecast in terms of our daily operations in our local municipalities, even including, as you mentioned, special events, and determine whether or not we're going to have our Sounds of Summer on our Thursday nights during the summer, whether or not we should cancel that or go forward with it. So we very much rely and appreciate on the information that you provide. I wonder if you could just, either you or Mike could expand on the interface you have with the local municipalities. I know you've touched on it a little bit in terms of your communications with the police and fire departments, the public works department, but if you could just expand on that, who your points of contact are. I should know that probably, but I'd just like to hear it from your perspective.
Sure. So yeah, it's police, fire, EMA. If you have a dedicated EMA is typical, and public works are most common. Sometimes we get folks from the Parks Department. Sometimes the Park District is a little bit separate. So Arlington Heights, the fire department is who we work through actually. And so they're tuned into our briefings during the summer for storms and that type of thing. But I mentioned chat. I forgot to go back and discuss what that actually was. We call it NWS chat. That's one of the primary kind of continuous methods of communication that we have with partners. So government partners, the broadcast television meteorologists are in there from both the Chicago and Rockford markets. We rely on them to amplify our message. We work great with them. But it's a 24/7 chat interface. We recently made a major overhaul into it, so we can post graphics, we can post photos, we can get reports, which you rely on from your communities, in particular of what's going on or what has happened, whether it's after a line of severe thunderstorms, or maybe we're seeing precipitation or snow start to stick to the roadways. It's a question answer venue. It's kind of a single stop for not only monitoring conditions and us proactively pushing information out in terms of what we're seeing, how something is evolving, what our confidence is in the forecast that we're putting out the door. but also to answer questions and provide consultation as needed. So that's one of the primary ways, at least on a daily, minute-to-minute basis perhaps, and sometimes it is minute-to-minute when we have thunderstorms rolling through. Winter storms evolve a little bit more slowly, so it's longer fuse, we call it, so that the communications might be a little bit less frequent than that. But even prior to that, heads up is a big thing. Planning, you need to adjust resources, staffing, you planning for overtime, you have enough materials, all these types of things. We do email blasts as well. So that'll maybe go out 2-3 days before an event, if it's going to be more of a severe thunderstorm outbreak, or looking at a winter storm watch situation a few days before an event, or maybe it's going to be an unusually cold period for us. We're going to be dealing with the dangerous cold for folks. We may also hold webinars in the winter season as well, or for severe weather outbreaks. I mentioned sort of the real-time briefings earlier. These might be a couple days ahead of time, so people can be planning. They, again, adjust staffing as needed, activate cooling or warming centers, as it were. But we have had over 700 folks attend some of these webinars before a winter storm before. So we're trying to be more out in the community in the sense of, working with local government decision makers at all levels, because chances are they're dealing with weather information. They may have a contractor and that provides them very specific information, more specific than we can. We don't compete with the private sector. We're there to work with them, or maybe they don't have that access, and then we can be a very valuable source of information for them. So Eric mentioned Storm Ready, several Storm Ready communities in here as well. So that's on the planning front. So instead of planning for a few days out, we're looking at just the general plans for the community. It's about getting weather information in, getting it back out to the community or the decision makers within your decision-making trees that you have for government, community outreach, communication systems. We call it Storm Ready. We don't call it Storm Proof because we know that's not possible, but we want communities to be as ready as they can in terms of understanding what the threats are, perhaps taking mitigation steps, but certainly helping prepare citizens as to what they can do, not only before the storm, but also after. Resiliency is becoming a big topic for us and how we can assist in, things after an event as well. So does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
it does. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Anyway, I want to thank you guys very much for coming. I think this has been a very enlightened conversation, and I would hope that maybe in another year or two, we could maybe have you back with all this advancement and technology that you're sharing and reporting. That, there's probably some of us at our own cities would like to incorporate our ability to kind of access more of this information, because I think all of us as mayors feel pressure from our community about keeping them alert when it's specifically a tornado or some kind of a bad rain or weather storm is coming upon them. So you're a key component in the future of the region here, and I appreciate your good job that you are doing. And it looks like the promise is there that you're going to continue to enhance it and keep us all informed as to what's going on and allow us to communicate better with you. So I appreciate that very much.
Thank you very much. Definitely appreciate the opportunity. If you have questions about whether we work with the community, let me know, or check with your directors or your chiefs. They probably know about us. If they don't, feel free to send them our way.
Well, we've got an excellent staff here at CMAP now that really stays tuned to what's going on in the region in a variety of aspects. And certainly this weather one is, I think, one that they're starting to pick up on with more stronger interest as to what's really happening here, because we've got a lot going on. So thank you again for coming in. We'll probably be inviting you back one of these days. So thank you.
Thank you.
Where do you want to go to this one? All right, today's theme is weather and resilience. Now we'll hear from Kate Evasic, CMAP's program lead, to tell us how CMAP is addressing the future of extreme weather and how it affects our transportation system. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here to share a large portion of what constitutes our climate resilience program, which is the development of a transportation resilience improvement plan for the region. And this is the first plan for the region. And thank you, Eric and Mike, for that great presentation. It's a fabulous segue into what I'm here to share with you today. I'm also excited because we just hit a major milestone, having completed the first climate vulnerability assessment for the regional transportation system. This work was directly recommended by ONTO 2050, and it's important to CMAP as it'll inform the regional transportation plan. It will influence resilience policy, allow this information to integrate resilience into our planning and our programming work, and provide data and tools, importantly, to municipalities and other regional partners to help inform your work and tackle these issues. Next slide, please. So the goal of TRIP is to identify opportunities to improve the resilience of the transportation network to flooding, heat waves, and other extreme weather and climate change impacts. Developing this plan will really help us take steps towards building a more resilient transportation system and resilient communities that are better equipped to withstand the storms, not just that we experience today, but as Eric showed, that we'll experience in the future. The plan will also help us position the region to compete for climate resilience funds, as well as flood mitigation funds through FEMA, as well as different sources like federal highways and other agencies, state agencies as well. And we're not doing this work alone. We do have an excellent consultant team that's been instrumental in crafting this work. So this project is taking a comprehensive view of the transportation network. We're looking not only at risks to the infrastructure and the improvements that are needed, but also to service operations and, quite frankly, how we all experience the system as users, as everyone in this room experienced today with the weather that we had this morning. Climate change impacts all of these aspects of our transportation network, and so we need to be proactive about building resilience across the board. The plan seeks to increase resilience in 4 main ways. First, by identifying and prioritizing those major transportation assets in the region that are vulnerable to extreme weather and climate change. Second, then using that information to identify and prioritize infrastructure investments to build resilience and reduce those climate risks. Next, we want to make sure that the investments and other improvements that we propose in the plan can really drive equitable and just outcomes in communities that are overburdened by climate impacts and underserved by the transportation system. And then finally, informing the process by which transportation projects get developed, designed, and funded so that we're proactively contributing to the solution. The first phase in developing the plan is to assess climate risks and vulnerabilities of the transportation system. And what's important to know about this assessment is that it is forward-looking. And what I mean by that is that the goal of understanding which hazards will be made worse by climate change is our goal so that we can focus on those impacts and focus on what we need to adapt to these changing conditions. We conducted the assessment following 5 steps. So first, we evaluated recent trends and the latest projections to understand what climate change will look like in our region. Next, we looked at a higher level, system level, to identify which components of the transportation system are most likely to be impacted by climate-related events. So for example, we assessed the impacts of flooding on roads, bridges, and transit, both bus and train, as a whole, so that at a high level, we could get a high, medium, low ranking. And then using that assessment, we used additional data to actually score transportation assets for risks to flooding and in some cases to extreme heat so that we could identify where those assets and risks are distributed across the region and incorporate that information into our planning and our programming work. And then finally, we looked more closely at heat impacts to transit riders to identify locations or routes where riders are at greater risk in the region. And one thing I want to note on, this is work that's currently underway. We are in the process of estimating the economic impacts of flooding on roadways. So we're trying to monetize the impacts to passenger, freight, and transit delays so that we can use that information to help justify funding proposals and also equip communities with more information, as well as CMAP staff. So this assessment has been in the works for some time now. We began in early 2023. And since then, we've been collaborating with agencies and advocates in the transportation, emergency management, and stormwater fields through our project steering committee. We've also held some stakeholder workshops as well to influence this work. And we've completed the vulnerability assessment in November of last year. And we're working towards having the final completed resilience improvement plan by the end of this year. So what did we find in the vulnerability assessment? Many of you know this all too well, and Eric's presentation just spoke to this, but it was important for us to affirm that flooding poses the biggest threat with the current and future impacts impacting basically all aspects of our transportation system, the infrastructure, the service, and the users. Climate models show that this trend of more heavy and frequent rainstorms will continue, and therefore we need to be prepared and we need to change the way that we act. And so of the road miles that we studied, we found that 34% have high or very high risk of flooding, meaning that they could experience up to 2 feet of flooding during a 500-year flood event by mid-century, by 2050. We also found, not surprisingly, bus stops are also vulnerable, with 64% of CTA bus stops and 47% of PACE bus stops exposed to flooding. When looking at our regional commuter rail, 36% of CTA stations and 31% of Metra stations are at risk of some level of flooding. And then lastly, 61% of our regional trail system are at high or very high risk. And this isn't that surprising since so many of those trails follow rivers and streams, but is important nonetheless, and certainly have issues related to accessing, using those trails, as well as maintenance. Looking at roads a bit more closely, this map on the right here shows the roads with high and very high flood risk. And you can see that our most urban areas have the highest risk, including Chicago and suburban Cook, as well as Aurora and Elgin, Joliet, and Waukegan. But that said, as many of you know in your own communities, there are roads with high vulnerability across the board in more suburban and rural communities alike. And so when looking at this breakdown by county, shown in the table here, we see that Cook County has the highest percentage of high or very high risk roads at 44%. But then every other county except for Kendall falls within, the 25 to 30 plus range of roads that we assessed. And so that's significant too. We also found that extreme heat will be an increasing threat. Climate models are showing that annual days with average temperatures over 95 degrees will increase from 2 days to 18 days by 2050 across the region. But this map is showing us that the number of extremely hot days will increase across the board, but you can see in the darker shades of orange and brown here that the greatest increases are really going to be in the central and southwest portions of the region. Lastly, we wanted to look at how extreme heat would impact transit riders, and we wanted to do this for a few different reasons. First, we know that heat doesn't impact people equally, and second, transit riders in particular are vulnerable because they're more exposed to the elements, and some riders may not have access to other modes of transportation and really rely on public transit. So to understand heat vulnerability, we looked at exposure to the extreme temperatures that I just showed on the previous slide, as well as social and health vulnerability data, and then condition at bus stops and train stations like tree shade or wait times. And when accounting for all these risk factors, we found that more than half of the bus stops and rail stations have high or very high transit rider vulnerability. Urban areas of the region score higher than non-urban areas, with concentrations in Chicago, South and West Cook County, as well as Aurora, Elgin, Joliet, and Waukegan, which align with longstanding inequities in marginalized and underserved communities. I'm excited to announce that we have data available for download, for viewing on a web map as well, and we have the report itself. It's lengthy, so what you all received today is our executive summary, but we do have the full report available on our website. These are just the data layers that we've published. So we have, if you could go back for a second, we have data on roads and flooding, bridges and culverts and flooding, regional trails, transit, and again, coming later on this year, we'll have some information on economic costs to share. So using the results, this data can and will be used in many ways, particularly by CMAP. We're going to be using this data to directly inform the Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan. We're going to have a project list in that plan, and those risk scores can help us prioritize those projects. The data can also support funding applications. PROTECT is just one. It's Federal Highways Transportation Resilience Program, funded through the infrastructure bill. But there, I'm sure, as you are aware of, many different funding programs that where applications would benefit from the use of this data. We're using the data in our evaluation for the STP Shared Fund program this year to help support the resilience planning factor. And then the data and the projects that are going to be highlighted in the plan will also inform long-range transportation planning across the region, and importantly, our regional transportation plan. And lastly, most relevant to you all here, this data can be used at the municipal or at the council level as well to influence planning. And we actually piloted this approach with the Central Council of Mayors a couple years ago or a few years ago to give them a more detailed plan for their communities. So looking at the work that lies ahead, we'll continue to work with our steering committee and other stakeholders. I'd like to come back to this committee, if you'll have me, to share an update on the plan. And in the first half of this year, we'll be soliciting projects to include in the plan and really laying out what a resilience project actually means. That's a question that comes up again, even within staff, of what are those, that list, that suite of resilience measures that could be incorporated into the transportation projects that we maybe already have in the books, but haven't been fully designed yet. So how can we build resilience into those projects? And so, we're also looking forward to coming out of this plan with some policy-based actions too, how we can address land use to incorporate resilience, and also address some things more on the ground in terms of asset management and other considerations. And so, again, we're working towards having a final plan by 2025, and it aligns nicely to help be able to influence our regional transportation plan as well that's underway. So that's all I have prepared for you today. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, what your town is grappling with, what you're working on to address those challenges, and of course, answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Well, as chairman here, I'd just like to make the observation that we started this with this very insightful presentation by the Weather Bureau about what's really happening and how things are changing and whatever. And then you came in with all this data that you've now been able to assemble and put together. I mean, I think there's some messages here that, in this room right now, I think there's 18 or 20 cities out of 275 or whatever we got in the region. That number changes a little bit all the time. I would think maybe we should ask if we could maybe put together some kind of a small program that we could take to each one of the, 18 sub-regional councils? And over the next couple of years, I mean, I think every one of them is going to be very interested in learning what we've learned from the Weather Bureau and what you've just shared with us. And, if you can kind of put that together in a presentation, all this flooding and the impact on our roads and all the other stuff that's coming together here, this is going to be in the face of every mayor and city government and board of directors and village presidents in the region is going to have this something to deal with. And I really take great pride in being associated with CMAP, that you're kind of coming together and putting this together as a program, because I don't believe this has ever been done before in this subject.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is certainly a first for our region, spurred from some federal funding that we have, but we are excited because it aligns with a lot of the other work. We are also working on a large climate action plan that looks at how we might reduce greenhouse gases. And just given our role in infrastructure, right, it's really imperative. And actually, I found it very enlightening that it was such a small portion of the atmosphere, right? Like when you think about it, it's just these tiny changes have huge impacts. And so our role here again, and Kate talked about this a lot, is really to figure out how we can use the funding that we have and the programming resources that we have, not only to build more resilient infrastructure, but to think about it comprehensively. So thank you, Kate. Thanks, Mayor Schilke.
Thank you. Does anybody in the audience want to, the council make any? I think we've kind of hit the nail on the head here as far as what we really want to do and understand it better, because there is a very strong message that all the mayors and village presidents in the region need to learn about this and hear it and understand it, because it doesn't sound like it's getting any better. I guess it would maybe be there's going to be more and more challenges, let's just say, than what we've had previously. And we've had a bunch, but just the whole ability now to find the tornadoes when they're occurring. And we now know there's more than we ever thought there were. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that needs to be disseminated to those in leadership in the cities. So thank you for this presentation. Okay, you want to go to this one?
Yeah.
All right, continuing on here, I'm going to ask Kama Dobbs to come up. We started the discussion at our September meeting with a briefing by CMAP staff about the next many sources of federal transportation funding that this agency manages. Kama's here as principal in research, analysis, and programming divisions, and she will share backgrounds of federal regulations that created the Metropolitan Planning Organization and CMAP's history and responsibility as an MPO. You are welcome to ask questions at any time during the presentation. I might just note that if you go out into the hinterlands of sitting with other mayors, and given the changes in the U.S. government that are about to unfold in the next week, nobody's quite sure what's going where, what, when, why, how the money's going to flow or whatever. And I had my ears bent by a group of state legislators last week about their wonderments about what's at the state level, much less the national level, as to how it's all going to come together. So this is another pretty insightful message that you're about to share.
Absolutely, and I certainly cannot predict the future, but I will talk about how we got to where we are today, and maybe that'll help inform our future. So good morning, Kama Dobbs, Principal for Federal Transportation Funding Programs, and today I'm going to do my best to answer that question that's on the screen, exactly what it means for CMAP to be an MPO. So I'll walk through how we got here, what we do as an MPO, how our operational structure supports that, and then where we're going in the next couple of years. As I walk through this today, keep in mind that Northeastern Illinois has an extraordinary legacy of transportation infrastructure that includes almost 30,000 miles of roads, thousands of bridges, a rail system with 7,200 miles of track that move not only people, but also 50% of the container freight in the US, as well as hundreds of transit stations and routes. So let's start with some history of the transportation planning industry. More than a century ago, the U.S. Congress realized that the country's transportation systems required federal attention and funding for expansion. Congress passed a series of laws that provided that funding and gradually moved planning responsibilities to states and regional agencies. The legislation and principal set of rules and regulations regarding highways and transportation funding falls within Title 23 of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations. So if anything's going to change about how we do business or how we're funded, Title 23 is what needs to be updated. So beginning with the Federal Aid Road Act in 1916, federal laws evolved from a highway expansion focus to a focus on a continuous, cooperative, and comprehensive planning process for all modes of transportation. And the responsibility for planning moved from the federal level and became more localized with the 1973 Federal Aid Highway Act that passed planning funding to urbanized areas and created MPOs. On the next slide here in Northeastern Illinois, the transportation planning process was well ahead of the federal requirements and was led by the Chicago Area Transportation Study, or CATS. Established in 1955, CATS was a venture of the state of Illinois, Cook County, the city of Chicago, and the U.S. Department of Commerce Bureau of Public Roads. CATS had a policy committee, a technical committee, and included participation from these agencies as well as the Chicago Transit Authority. CATS was operated by employees of the Illinois Division of Highways at that time. The task of the initial study was to analyze present, which means 1956, travel behavior to forecast the future requirements of the metropolitan region, and to develop a plan for needed highways and mass transportation facilities. With their initial plan concluded and issued in 1962, CATS recognized the relationship between transportation and land use and the need for ongoing data collection and analysis, and acknowledged that a regional framework should drive local development decisions to ensure a comprehensive and connected system. CATS convened the then 260 regional mayors and village presidents first in 1964 to meet its obligations for that 3C planning process. Those meetings included representatives from the Northeastern Illinois Planning Commission, known as NIPSI, which is a sister organization that addressed land use planning separately from transportation planning. These meetings set the stage for establishing the Council of Mayors that we know today. In 1965, the full Council of Mayors was formalized, and by the early 1970s, your regional councils of mayors started meeting regularly at their sub-regional level. This committee, the Council of Mayors Executive Committee, was established in 1981, that year keeps coming up, to link the regional councils of mayors with CATS and to allocate funding for transportation projects. The collaboration between CATS and NIPSI continued for about 40 years until 2005. When the Illinois General Assembly passed the Regional Planning Act, consolidating CATS and NIPSI into one agency that we know today as CMAP. CMAP functions as both the federally designated metropolitan planning organization and as the state-authorized regional transportation planning agency for Northeastern Illinois. The CMAP region includes 7 full counties and 4 townships, 2 each in DeKalb and Grundy counties, that encompass 284 municipalities and over 8.6 million people. All that brought us to today, but what is it that we're responsible for as the MPO for Northeastern Illinois? MPO stands for Metropolitan Planning Organization. The MPO upholds the 3 Cs, providing a continuing cooperative and comprehensive transportation planning process for both short-range and long-range activities. The MPO exists to provide all of you, the local elected officials, as well as the public, with a way to participate in and influence the planning activities and use of federal funds for transportation. MPOs are designated by state governors for metro areas with populations over 50,000. Nationwide, there are more than 450 MPOs, and including CMAP, 16 of those are here in Illinois. The MPO's core responsibilities are shown here. We must develop a short-range funding and implementation program called the TIP for the next 5 years, as well as a long-range transportation plan that looks out at least 20 years. In our planning and programming, we must have a congestion management process, set and work toward achieving performance targets, such as asset conditions, safety, mobility, and air quality. And in all of the things, we must have participation from the public. Our short-range program is the Transportation Improvement Program, called the TIP. The TIP describes the transportation programming process in the region and primarily consists of a listing of project descriptions and funding details for all federally funded and regionally significant projects that will be implemented within the next 5 years. The funds programmed within each fiscal year of the TIP can never exceed the revenues available to the region in those years. So this fiscal constraint is why projects in the region cannot receive federal funding if they are not properly programmed in CMAP's TIP. For local projects, the Council of Mayors Planning Liaisons ensure that that proper programming happens by submitting regular amendments to the TIP throughout the year, including twice-a-year conformity amendments for capacity-adding projects that can impact the region's ability to conform to air quality standards. The TIP also includes the allocation of funds to projects that are selected by CMAP, as well as by the Councils of Mayors. Speaking of those allocations, as this graphic illustrates, funding flows from programs established by Congress to the state through IDOT, and then to all of the MPOs in the state, including CMAP. As you learned at your last meeting, these funds support these 4 major programs that CMAP develops. And that first one up there, STP, as we all know, has a regional component known as the shared fund, as well as the local component that all of your councils administer. The next major responsibility of the MPO is the Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP. The RTP has at least a 20-year planning horizon. As I mentioned when reviewing our history, CATS adopted the first long-range RTP in 1962. Go to 2040 and on to 2050 are the most recent of those plans. The RTP sets the policy foundation for our work and must examine existing conditions, forecast changes to land use, identify reasonably expected transportation revenues over the planning horizon, and include an allocation of those revenues for maintaining our transportation system and for implementing the major regional capital projects that will address the policy goals of the plan. The RTP must be updated at least every 4 years, and so our next RTP is due in October 2026, and you'll be hearing a lot about that over the next year and a half. On the next slide, both the TIP and RTP must be developed with performance management in mind. The goal of performance management is to move the needle region-wide to improve pavement and bridge conditions and to reduce congestion, crashes, emissions, and single occupant vehicle trips. Performance management starts with the long-term goals established by the RTP as well as federal regulations. To meet our goals, we collect and analyze data to develop reasonably attainable targets for the short term. These targets help us to prioritize projects and allocate funds. This performance management process is never really completed as we continuously collect that data, we track our projects and make adjustments as needed. So knowing what we're responsible for, how do we pull it all off? Here's an outline of our organizational structure. We have an 18-member appointed board that represents Chicago, Cook County, and the Collier counties. That CMAP board is responsible for carrying out the requirements of the Regional Planning Act. The MPO Policy Committee includes members from the region's transportation implementers, including the counties and municipalities. The MPO is the decision-making body for all regional transportation plans and programs for Northeastern Illinois and is responsible for meeting all MPO requirements. These bodies are also guided and advised by several public committees, including this Council of Mayors Executive Committee. So the MPO Policy Committee is the body that serves as the MPO. The MPO Policy Committee and the CMAP Board operate under a memorandum of understanding for providing staff, funding, and a committee structure that serves both of those boards. And they each have representatives on the other. The MPO Policy Committee is, again, that final decision maker on the required actions, plans, programs, and documents of the MPO. The MPO Policy Committee meets quarterly, and Mayor Schalke is your current representative on the MPO Policy Committee. Because the work of the MPO is focused on transportation planning, the MPO has a direct relationship with our Transportation Committee. The Transportation Committee reviews most everything that ultimately goes to the MPO Policy Committee for approval and provides recommendations for action. The Transportation Committee includes senior staff from our transportation agencies, counties, advocacy groups, as well as a mayor from this committee, which is currently Mayor Rockingham from North Chicago. The Transportation Committee also relies on and is informed by several project selection committees, which also have members from the Council of Mayors Executive Committee. So now you know how we came to be, what we have to do, the organizational structure for doing that, but where are we going from here? Over the next several years, we will be working to develop a new regional vision beyond onto 2050 that will include updated analysis on transportation, climate, and the economy with scenario planning to prepare for future uncertainty. The vision will include a new statement of values to guide our decision-making based on community visioning on what remains important to the region's residents. As I mentioned earlier, we're also working to develop a new regional transportation plan before October of 2026. This plan will build on the mobility work included onto 2050 and will maintain a 2050 planning horizon, but it will be separated from the regional comprehensive plan this cycle while we pursue that updated regional vision. I also want to emphasize that the RTP is not just a technical document. It's an opportunity for the region to reflect on our vision and goals for the transportation system, to check in on our progress on these goals, and to use this information to prioritize the policies and strategies that guide transportation investments for the long-term future of Northeastern Illinois. So just a quick recap, federal law created MPOs to develop long-range plans and short-term programs to allocate federal funding. CMAP was created in 2005 to be the MPO for Northeastern Illinois, following and building on the long-running work of CATS, the region's first MPO. CMAP implements onto 2050, the current regional transportation plan, to guide investments and priorities in the TIP. And an updated regional transportation plan, which will guide that our future investments going forward, is under development now. So that's the very, very quick MPO 101 there. Happy to answer questions. I know that we have plans to kind of pull some pieces out of this and dive a little deeper in the next few meetings with all of you. So
I think it's important that you advise us kind of what's in the works and what's being kind of proposed. There will be some more discussion at our future meetings as time moves on, so this isn't any final thing that we're doing today, but we just wanted our council of mayors to be aware that this is kind of in the works, and it is probably something that needs to be enhanced, updated, and, you know, there's constant changes, and as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of concern about, I don't know, we'll use the word concern, but there's a lot of interest in where the political world and the government world is gonna go in the next 4 years, given what we hear on the national TV every night. So we shall see what we shall see, but we certainly want to be part of those discussions and be able to throw our 2 cents on the table anytime something comes up that we think needs to be representative in the Chicagoland area. And I'm so thankful that we have a staff here at CMAP that's on top of this and is ready, prepared to communicate this to our other mayors. And one of the things I think I have to do is we have to figure out a way that we incorporate most of this information to all the other mayors and village presidents in the region that are out there, because there's a lot coming down here, and probably unlike ever before. So it's something that we as a region need to have a firm grip on and understanding. And we're blessed right now to have the staff that can put it together and analyze it and do it for us. So keep up the great work.
Well, thank you very much. And I think, you know, part of the history lesson today is that this long-range transportation planning lives on through the ebb and flow of politics over the years. And, you know, it's our job to make sure that we're planning for the priorities of our region, regardless of what's going on at the national level.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody on the staff?
Yeah, John's here.
John Carpenter is here, and he's the CMAP Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, and he's here to provide us with an update on the legislative activities and CMAP's legislative agenda for the next 2 years. John?
Thank you, Mayor. There isn't much legislative activity to talk about. The legislature's just going in right now, but I appreciate the opportunity to give you an update on the development of our 2025-2026 federal and state advocacy agenda. The agenda is developed in coordination with the federal and state legislative sessions through the lens of ON to 2050 and CMAP's strategic direction, focusing on transportation, climate, and regional economic competitiveness. We also look through the lens of our regional policy priorities. I'm excited to share that the agenda was approved by our Board of Directors at its January meeting just yesterday. As far as next steps, we'll be sending printed copies of the approved agenda to members of this committee, and it's also available on our website. Additionally, we will be traveling throughout the region to present the 2025-2026 to the local councils of mayors. We also will share our 2025-2026 agenda with CMAP's congressional and state legislative delegation, as well as our regional partners to ensure alignment and foster collaboration on shared priorities. And with that, happy to answer any questions on the agenda. I know you're running short on time. You have a big agenda today, so if there's any questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, we'll be sending the documents out probably in the next couple of weeks.
Well, I'll just say, like I just said to Kama, we're very fortunate to have you kind of on the top of this thing, looking down into the legislature and the Congress and everybody else that's doing stuff that could have a significant impact on us. It's probably a little bit premature to talk about stuff because a lot of it hasn't really come out yet or has been done. But it's good to know we got somebody right there that can bring it to us as quickly as possible when something happens. So
Well, this will become the busy season for the IGA team as the legislature starts organizing itself. Committee chairs are being appointed as we speak. Leadership teams are being put together, and they'll be coming back into session the end of this month. And once that happens, we'll be in for a sprint until May.
very good. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
Well, as our agenda originally indicated, when we came here to the meeting, we were going to vote on some things. And unfortunately, I think due largely to the weather situation that occurred, we don't have a voting quorum here to act on items before us. And so we got to make sure that we behave ourselves and don't go off here half-cocked and do some stuff that shouldn't, the rest of the world hasn't had their chance to put their say in. So I'm going to propose that we move all the committee business items to the time of our next meeting, which will be March 4th. And we'll send the word out loud and clear to everybody that's not here today, and certainly to those of you who are here, that that will be an important meeting on March the 4th, because we do need to get some of these things resolved. But overall, certainly, I think this has been one of the more insightful and informative meetings we've had. We have a lot of them, but this has been an extra special one today. I just wish more of the mayors were here to see and hear it and learn what's going on. Did you want to make any final comment?
If I could, I was reminded that in front of you, you have our annual report for our CMAP work and activities. Highlights many projects that we've done across the region in partnership with your councils at the local community level, our work to make sure that we have good data. And so take a look. If you need additional copies, we have additional copies, but really appreciate your partnership in making sure that our work is successful and relevant moving forward. So that is the last thing that I had to share with you today.
All right, I would like to, number one, thank everyone who came today. I mean, there was some real, I came in with our staff from Kane County on the train from Geneva, and we were a little bit slow in getting here. We weren't sure we were going to get here for the chairman to be here for the start of the meeting, but we did make it with about 3 minutes to spare, I think. But we got here. But I think there was others that got deferred or detoured or stopped or whatever. So I just want to say there will be no further other business. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, March 4th, and it will start at 9:30 here in this room. And if you can put the word out to all of our other councils that didn't make it in, that there is some very important stuff here. And I think given what we will probably know more of the political world at the state and national level by March the 4th. And, you know, as I've had many people tell me, Illinois has got an impressive role here, given the number of congressmen and U.S. senators that, well, we have two, but they're very much in touch. We got some ability here to get the word in of what we feel and think, and specifically to our congressional delegation. And I think we need to get it loud and clear at the municipal level with the mayors and village presidents, what really are the concerns and what we should be advocating and doing and whatever. In Batavia, I've got 7 senior living communities in my town. I've got a lot of senior citizens. And I will tell you right now that the mayor walks into any one of the 7, and I've done it recently, Social Security in its future is a high, heavy, concerning agenda item in the minds of all those people. And many of them are very dependent on Social Security. So I've passed the word on to our congressman. I said, you know, you better be prepared to talk about it and hopefully vote the right way, whatever that's going to be, if they're going to do something on Social Security, because that's just one of some issues that are really out there facing the world. And so we've stirred the pot here, and now it's going to be time to kind of hopefully cool it down and get it running in the right direction. And some of the things that we do here probably have never had as much importance and interest and need for the region to go in the right direction as they do right now. And we're just, I'll use the word blessed to have the staff that we have here to kind of keep us informed and take us in the right road. So thanks to the staff and thank everybody for coming. And with that, I will,
No need to adjourn.
I can't adjourn it because I don't have enough to vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.